Hi everyone, I would like to just give you all a little warning. This case is most distressing and not for the faint hearted. Unfortunately, it brings us a family that was wiped out by someone who was supposed to love, care, and protect his family. For those of you that have a sensitive disposition to content like this, I urge you not to watch. All opinions in this video on how the case was dealt with by the justice system and the media are of the extended family and organisations that deal with domestic violence. I do know that mental health is a big question in this case and others like it, and opinions will be split, but please keep it respectful in the comments. Today we are heading to County Cavan. It can be found in the province of Ulster near the border of Northern Ireland. Cavan is famed for its many lakes and the source of the River Shannon, known as the Shannon Pot. But we are specifically going to the town of Ballyjamesduff, which is located on the east side of County Cavan. It is a market and post town and is situated on the old mail coach road from Virginia to Cavan. Clodagh Hawe was born in 1977. She grew up in a small village called Mount Nugent, which is around 8 kilometres from Ballyjamesduff. Mary, Clodagh's mother, would say, as any mother would, that she was a beautiful child. She was always easy to manage, mature for her age, and wasn't demanding. She always did her best at school and was never in trouble as a teenager. Clodagh was very quiet and not very confident in herself, but as she grew older, her confidence grew with it. She did her Leaving Cert exams when she was 17 and received 515 points. She always studied hard. When she left school, she went to St Patrick's College in Drumcondra in Dublin to train to be a teacher. Jacqueline, Clodagh's sister, would say she was the type to try and steer you in the right direction. She would say she did not always take her advice. She was the sensible one. She'd give Jacqueline a lecture or two every now and again over speeding in the car or not saving money and overspending. But she was always there to guide me, and she was there when my son was born after my husband passed away. And she was just always very supportive, and I knew no matter what, I could always go to her, and she was always there, Jacqueline said. When Clodagh attended St Patrick's College, she would live on campus, and in her first year there on Valentine's night, she would meet a man, Alan Hawe, who was also attending the same college and living on campus, but in a separate house. He was a year older than Clodagh and from a small village, Winegap, in County Kilkenny. From the get-go, Clodagh's family saw a change in her. She used to go out socialising and have a few drinks. But Alan didn't drink, so she stopped drinking. Also, the family and friends noticed that soon, wherever Clodagh was, Alan was surely with her. The family described their relationship as all-consuming. Once the two graduated, they would get married in the church on college grounds not long after. Jacqueline would be bridesmaid, and she recalled that day they went to pick up her dress for the wedding. Jacqueline had a feeling that Alan would be there, and she was right. When they all met up, she tested the waters as such and said to Alan, quote, "Well, Alan, we'll see you later, when we're finished." And he said, "Oh no, I'm coming with you." And Jacqueline said, "I can't try on dresses in front of you." Looking at Clodagh, Jacqueline said, "When you're ready to do this, just the two of us will do it together." And that was it. Jacqueline said there was an unease, a control element around the situation, and it was just uncomfortable. When it came to the wedding day, Alan walked Clodagh up the aisle, Mary, her mother, not getting the opportunity to do so. When Mary was asked about how she felt about this at that time, she said she felt a little put out, but didn't give it much thought, because Clodagh was happy. She was happy to do it that way. They were madly in love. He held her hand and he walked her up the aisle. Their first child was born in 2003, a little boy called Liam. He was much like his mother Clodagh, quiet and kind. He was very good at basketball and played the piano. At 13 in 2016, He was coming into his own. His confidence was building and he was very popular at school. In 2005, a second boy was born. His name was Niall. He was even quieter than Liam and loved going into his own little world of building Lego. He loved reading, particularly the David Williams books, and he enjoyed watching the Great British Bake Off and hoped to open his own bakery one day. Finally, the baby of the family, Ryan, was born in 2010. He was known in the family as Ryan the Rebel and loved Lego just like Niall did. The dynamics of the Hawe family was the five of them were always together outside of work and school. Clodagh's family found it very hard to see her without Alan by her side. If Mary and Jacqueline called for a cup of tea and a chat, Alan would sit at the kitchen table until they left, never leaving them to just chat with Clodagh on her own, so they never really got to know how her life was with Alan. Clodagh worked as a teacher at Orristown National School in Kells in County Meath, and Alan was vice principal at Clodagh National School, Ballyjamesduff. The only time they would see Clodagh on her own was when she'd come and collect the children from Mary's house, as she would look after the children when they finished school or they had a day off. A few days before everything that happened, Jacqueline said she spoke to Clodagh at her house. When she pulled up outside of the house and only saw one car there, she was delighted. She knew that Clodagh was there on her own, which was rare. Jacqueline was delighted to get Clodagh on her own, and they had a lovely chat, but it would be the last chat they would ever have. Mary also spoke about a phone call she received from Clodagh in the February 2016. Clodagh had asked her mother, Mary, "Can I talk to you?" Mary, of course, said yes. Clodagh explained that she was just outside and that she'd be in a minute. When the two were sat at the table, she told Mary that Alan had been watching porn. He had told her and it was affecting their marriage. Mary thinks now he told her out of guilt and that he only told Clodagh to ease his conscience and maybe get her permission to carry on doing it. Alan would start counselling soon after he told Clodagh, and Mary would check in on her to see how things were, and Clodagh would always say everything was going fine. Mary said she would know if Clodagh was not okay. When asked was Clodagh and the boys afraid of Alan, the answer was no. He was a good husband and father, at least from the outside, but we all know we never really know what is going on behind closed doors. You see, our Alan perceived himself to be the pillar of the community, very religious, went to Mass every Sunday and was involved in any community events that were taking place locally. But it was all falling apart and the Call family had no idea of the extent of it until after that Sunday, the 28th of August 2016. That evening, Clodagh 39, Alan 40, Liam 13, Niall 11 and Ryan 6 all called to Clodagh's mother's house. They had just returned from being away on holidays and Liam had a basketball game in Virginia that day, and so they called to see Mary on the way home. At around 7 p.m, the adults sat around the table having tea and biscuits, while the boys sat in the living room watching TV. Mary would say everything was normal. There was one subject that was a bone of contention, and that was Alan dreading the thoughts of going back to work. He actually even said he didn't want to go back to work. You see, Alan had conflict with another colleague in the previous months before the school holidays, and this had not yet been resolved. What the family would find out afterwards, through the counsellor's notes, was that Alan had been caught masturbating somewhere he shouldn't have been, and that he watched porn on his laptop, which he never brought home, always leaving it in school. However, solicitors representing Clodagh School later stated that no evidence had been found of Alan having watched pornography or any other unsavoury acts during school. By 9 p.m. that Sunday evening, Clodagh told Alan that they'd better be going, as little Ryan had to have a bath before bed. Ryan and Niall were not starting their new term the next day, so it was arranged that Mary would take the two boys while Alan, Clodagh and Liam started back to school that Monday morning. Mary said when they were leaving she hugged them all and said, "I love you." Mary would never see them again. She sat the next morning waiting for Clodagh to drop off the boys. They were late. She sat up and sat down, pacing all the while, wondering where they were. Clodagh would always ring, even if she was going to be 5 minutes late. Mary rang her phone, no answer. She rang the house phone, no answer. She rang Alan's phone, no answer. Then she texted both their phones, no reply. At this stage, Mary knew something was wrong. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. She got into her car and drove over to the house. It was only 5 kilometres away, but it was the longest journey she ever put in. As Mary drove up to the house, she saw all the curtains drawn and the 2 cars in the driveway. She had a key to the back door, and so she went around to the back of the house, and as she went to put the key in the lock, she saw a note taped to the door. It read, quote, "Don't come in, call the Gardaí." Mary recognised the handwriting as Alan's. With this, she ran out onto the road, dropped the phone, tried to ring 999 around 10 times, but she was shaking so much she hardly could dial. Finally, she managed it and told Gardaí what she had found written on the back door. Mary then went to Clodagh's neighbours, Edie, to tell her that she thought Alan had done something to Clodagh and the boys. They both went back to the house together and waited for the Gardaí. The first 2 guards to arrive on the scene was Garda Aisling Walsh and Garda Alan Ratcliffe. They told the 2 women to go back to the neighbour's house and wait there. A while later, the 2 Gardaí went to see poor Mary. It was bad. They told her, "We found 5 bodies. There's no one alive." Meanwhile, as word got out, Jacqueline was on her way to her mother. It was coming in on her phone, 5 found dead in Cavan. It would come out in the inquest that Clodagh was killed first. She was online looking up holidays and was having a cup of tea. Alan came up behind her and hit her in the head with an axe he had gotten from the shed, and then he stabbed her in the back. She put up her hand to defend herself, and he basically nearly chopped her hand off. He killed her like he hated her. He didn't need to use 2 weapons. He killed her with such brutality. It was evil, Jacqueline said. He then left the knife and axe on the floor beside the couch and sat down to write the first part of a letter. It was 5 A4 size pages about how he felt, how the truth was going to come out eventually, and he reassured the families left behind that they had been a happy family. When he had part finished the letter, he got up and grabbed a different knife and went upstairs to the shared room of Liam 13 and Niall 11. He went to Liam's bed and knelt on his chest and cut his windpipe to render him silent, so he couldn't cry out to warn Niall. Liam, though, did have defensive wounds on his hands. He then did the exact same thing to Niall. When he had finished killing his 2 boys, he then went into little Ryan's room. Ryan 6 was very slight and thin for his age. He didn't stand a chance. Hawe then left the knife on Ryan's pillow and threw the duvet over him, as he did with Liam and Niall. After killing everyone, he went back downstairs and wrote some more, and transferred €2,000 from the joint account into his own account at around 2:30 a.m. He laid out all Clodagh's jewellery on the bed, to which he said Mary, her mother, was to have, along with photographs, money boxes, and even a tin used to keep the children's football club money. He had many instructions within the letter. He laid out all documents related to the mortgage, bank statements, and instructions that his brother was to have his car, which was brand new at the time. He told Jacqueline and his own 2 brothers not to mess up their lives like he had done, and not to forgive him, not to give him a Catholic burial, and to cremate his body and throw the ashes into the sea. After all the preparations he felt needed doing were done, Hawe went into the hallway of the house and hanged himself. In his own words, Hawe admitted that he had been caught red-handed, referring back to the counsellor's notes about the masturbating and pornography. It also came out that Hawe was in contact with the INTO, which is the Irish National Teachers Organisation. Whether it was for advice or for representation, the family don't know. He also spoke in the letter about shame, about not wanting Clodagh and the boys living with what he had done. He said Clodagh didn't know what he had done, and it would be easier for her to die than to know the truth about him. He said he was leading them into a life of ruin, and Clodagh would have to clean up his mess, and that when he went back to school it was all going to blow up. But nothing ever came of that. Like I said earlier, the school denied there was any problem with Hawe, and so the family have no answers. The school have never approached them on a personal or professional level. Mary and Jacqueline would say in an interview that it was said that Alan would dress up in Clodagh's underwear, and maybe this was another add-on that Clodagh didn't know about. Hawe said that his counsellor knew everything, but these counsellors' notes have never been made public. Jacqueline also stated that a local man told her that he and another person saw Hawe in the early hours of Monday morning, the 29th of August, driving near Castle Rahan School. The local man told Jacqueline also that he went to Gardaí and made a statement about the sighting of Hawe. When the Call family asked about this line of inquiry, they were told it may be a case of mistaken identity. The family were not happy with this response. To them it looked like Hawe was going to the school to wipe any evidence on his laptop, basically covering his tracks. In his counsellor's notes it was reported that Hawe viewed 97% of the pornography on a laptop at the school. The Call family have requested the files from the Gardaí, and they've declined that request. So the family, even after the inquest, have questions that have not been answered. They say they were drip-fed information by the Gardaí, and the media, not being the most reliable source, have told the family things, and then it would be confirmed by the Gardaí. The Call family feel that there has been an injustice done to Clodagh and the boys. Basically, the inquest was a disaster for the family. Hawe's medical and counselling records were brought up and examined by Professor Harry Kennedy, a consultant forensic psychiatrist and director of the Central Mental Hospital. Some conclusions were drawn about Hawe from these records about his state of mind at the time of the killings. It was said that Hawe had depression, and this had developed into psychosis or psychotic incidents, and this was what led to him, in theory, to do what he did. The Call family do not accept this, that somebody can wipe out their whole family and write about it, and an expert can sit in a box, look through all the literature, never meet the person and conclude that the person had chronic depression. Hawe even wrote in his letter, quote, "If it is any consolation, we were happy, Clodagh was happy, the boys were happy." It's very rare that you would hear someone suffering from depression say that they were happy, said Jacqueline. Hawe was attending his GP for 5 years, and she didn't diagnose him with depression or know that he was seeing a counsellor. He never missed time in work. He was never sick. He had a position of responsibility as vice principal at the school. He showed no signs of depression. He was out and about, GAA, football, etc. Hawe also stopped attending his counselling sessions 2 months before the killings. Why was that? Was it then he had decided to kill his own family? At around this time, Hawe also moved the couch in the living room that was on a side wall to front facing the fireplace, with the back of it facing the door into the room. Why? This couch had not been moved in the 12 years that they lived in the house. Was it because it was the perfect situ for the attack Hawe finally made on Clodagh? She wouldn't have seen him coming. Also, because Hawe was the last to die, the whole estate went to his next of kin, which was his family. The Call and the Hawe family came to a conclusion over the house, and now the Call family wanted knocked, and a garden of remembrance built in its place. So it's not as if the family wanted to gain financially. They wanted the house gone. This is an outdated act that needs to be changed. Every time a loved one is murdered, the family of the victim or victims have to go to court and fight, so the perpetrator or the perpetrator's family don't benefit from the killing. This act dates back to 1965. A planning application has been made to have the house knocked. Jacqueline has said she will be there to oversee it. As of the time of doing the research for this case, the house is still standing. Jacqueline also oversaw the removal of Hawe from the family plot. Unfortunately, with the family grieving and feeling duty bound at the time, they thought it was best that Hawe was buried with Clodagh and the boys. It wasn't until later on did they realise the gravity of what he had done to his beautiful family, and so they wanted him away from Clodagh and the boys. They couldn't apply themselves to have him removed, so they reached out to the Hawe family to do so, and they agreed. It would be May 2017 before this was done. He was taken out and cremated. The inquest went on for 2 days, and the conclusion was that, quote, Alan Hawe was found to have unlawfully killed Clodagh, his wife, and his sons Liam, Niall, and Ryan, before dying himself by suicide. Clodagh's surviving family have persistently argued that a psychological autopsy should have been undertaken, reconstructing events leading up to Hawe's death and ascertaining other significant factors, including intent. They feel that the families should have been spoken to, which they were not. Jacqueline would say Hawe was so manipulative. He only ever showed people what he wanted them to see. Only we know how unhinged he was. He would command attention with silence by standing in the doorway. He took over simple cooking tasks he was dissatisfied with. He'd rearrange and repeg laundry on the washing line to his standards. The Coroner's Act only pertained to the what, where, how and who. The why to the family is still not answered. They were told they would have to go outside Ireland and hire an independent expert's opinion if they wanted to refute the findings and conclusions of the why. The family are not in a position to do this. A serious crime review has been done on the case and has been shown to the Cole family, but the Justice Department still has not made it public as requested by the Cole family. Mary and Jacqueline did not want to speak publicly about Clodagh and the boys, but they had no choice. The government officials weren't listening to them, so they had to make their story public and get the people of Ireland behind them. It has worked to some extent, but they still have a long way to go. More than €60,000 has been raised by them for Women's Aid to help fund persons escaping domestic violence. At Orristown National School, Clodagh's name resonates in a new hall named in her memory. A tree planted by Liam's friends at his former school and other gestures acted away from the public eye echo just as loudly. Liam was studious, if alive today, would more than likely be in college. He could have been anything he wanted to be, said Mary. Whereas Niall was creative and little Ryan the rebel at just 6 was already the life of the party. They each would be finding their own path, she went on to say. They are still missed so much, and it shows by how many people still turn up to their anniversary mass each year. I wanted to put in a side note concerning the Hawe family. They did lose a son and their grandchildren and had to grieve in the same way, if not worse, because it was their son that was the perpetrator. They are in the belief that the professor of psychiatry got it right and that their son was sick and what he did was through depression. If that's what helps them get through each day, who am I to judge? A total of 27 cases of murder-suicide have occurred in Ireland between January 2007 and February 2021, and the numbers are still going up. Women's Aid has compiled a list of red flags of abuse. 1. He hates your friends and complains you spend too much time with them. 2. He sends you constant texts and gets mad when you ignore them. 3. He tells you how to dress and criticizes your clothes. 4. He makes you feel guilty if you don't spend all your free time with him. 5. He has a bad temper and you feel afraid to disagree with him. 6. He accuses you of cheating. 7. He demands all your passwords so he can check your messages. 8. You feel afraid to break up with him because he says he'll hurt himself. 9. He forces you to do things sexually that you don't want to do. 10. He is physically violent or threatens to hurt you or someone else. To me, this list, while relevant, is totally out of date, especially since coercive control became a criminal offence here in Ireland. So I hope they have added to this list. There are a lot more abusive signs that can be added on, especially pertaining to Clodagh and her boys' case. Please check out my video on coercive control when you get a chance if you haven't already seen it. I'll leave a link in the description box. Irish media that reported on Hawe, who murdered his wife and children, then killed himself, were criticised by women's rights organisations for portraying the killer as a victim. They said he should have been described first and foremost as a murderer who engaged in the most extreme act of domestic violence. In the aftermath of the deaths, some Irish news outlets focused on Hawe's reputation as a pillar of the community, with some reports asking what drove the 40-year-old to kill himself as well as his entire family. The Women's Aid Ireland said people were rushing in with excuses. The group's director, Margaret Martin, said, quote, "It is very clear he was a murderer. That is fairly conclusive. Does committing suicide mitigate you killing other people before that act? If he went into a school and killed staff and students before killing himself, what would we say? We have to stop the denial here. In terms of domestic violence, people have stereotypes of victim and perpetrator. There is a disconnect between an act like this and someone who is seen as a pillar of the community, who is well liked or seen as respectable. But we all know this is not true. It does not matter how rich, how educated, or how well off they are. Abusers cut across all social classes. It is not okay to consider the apparent reasons for the murders to be more important than the lives of those murdered. The first reaction to something like this happening is denial and immediate blinkering. Yet what are the facts of this case? They were 4 people, 3 of them children, who were killed, and then Hawe took his own life. That is the ultimate level of control, to decide who lives and who dies. It is the most extreme form of domestic violence. Rest in peace, Clodagh, Liam, Niall and Ryan.